I'm Lindsay Taylor, and I'm going to be presenting on Thomas Eakins and a focus on his relationship with Walt Whitman. How it was a very unique relationship. They were both kind of rebel artists of their time in the 18th century, very revealing of the inner nature of the human, and where art had been kind of beautifying and romanticizing things. Eakins really wanted to kind of get down to the nitty-gritty, and as well as Walt Whitman. And Thomas Eakins was brought up very traditional in a well-to-do family. He had a formal education, then eventually went to Paris and studied at École des Beaux-Arts and studied art. He, over in France, his main focus was on a lot of the nudes and just kind of the human figure. He was just fascinated by the human figure and really understanding anatomy, and really pushed the boundaries a lot on the ability to study a figure. And in his classes, he was a professor, and he would have his students be nude so that they could sketch, because he believed that you really need to understand the anatomy of a human in order to paint, to paint them realistically. When you look at the older paintings from like the 17th, 16th century, there's not a lot of bone structure or anything, but he really wanted to understand how the bones were structured. So he was introduced to, Thomas Eakins was introduced to Walt Whitman by Talcott Williams. They met once, and Talcott Williams believed that they would make, good friends, because they were both kind of like rebellious for their time. Walt Whitman was writing Blades of Grass, which was this very controversial poem that dealt a lot with sexuality, and it was just very controversial for that time, and they actually weren't able to publish it. And same, very similar to how Eakins, he ended up getting, having to resign from the Pennsylvania Academy because of his use of nudes in his classes. But so they were introduced, and Eakins came back a couple weeks later and brought this palette you see here, and said he was going to paint his portrait. And everyone at the time was trying to paint a portrait of Walt Whitman. He was getting older, and Walt Whitman was having many artists paint him, and it was just interesting that Thomas Eakins just kind of he didn't get asked by Walt Whitman. He just decided he was going to paint it. So he came, and this is the sketch you see here. It's on your cover page, and you just see he stripped down to the bare, he's showing his age, he's showing the shadows, he's not beautifying his old age, he's showing it for really what it is. And if you look at the second page, that's the final portrait of Whitman that Eakins painted, and this ended up being Whitman's favorite painting that anyone had done with him. I think part of that stems out of their very special relationship. They just had a really great understanding of each other, and Whitman was just mystified by the talent and the love for science, and the love for just seeing this heroism in people, and it's just their relationship just grew, and there's just so many different layers and depths to it. And if you look at the picture on figure 2, you can just see that his eyes are set back, he's leaning backwards, he's not looking into the camera, he's not trying to be all like beautified, like most portraits are. And not a lot of people really enjoyed that. So if you look at the next page, it's a portrait of his wife, Miss Thomas Eakins, and you can just see she doesn't look happy. You can see the wrinkles in her eyes, and a lot of women who had their portraits painted, like such as this portrait, just were appalled, and wouldn't come back to pick up the painting after they started painting it, or they just they were just very disappointed, because as I keep saying, traditionally the paintings had been just so beautified. And as a lot of artists at the time were trying to show movement and really capture, different aspects of the human face, he was really trying to look at, age and how he could age someone. And, just really showing them for really what they were. And if you go to the next page, you can see his painting called The Gross Clinic. And like I had said before, he was just really interested in, the human body and kind of how, how the body worked, how all the muscles worked, how all the internal organs worked. And he believed that you really needed to understand that in order to paint a good portrait, because you really need to understand how the body works, and really the bones underneath the skin, it's right underneath it. So he was very interested in painting portraits of men and women in their kind of their fields of science and innovation with aesthetics and moral innovation. And that had kind of been a traditional view, was that you're kind of heroized for thought. But he was at the time where money was starting to be heroized, so he was really trying to stick with that traditional conservative way of viewing things. And that's the difference that they shared. Eakins really wanted to see these esteemed scientists and artists, and he saw the cowboys, just all different parts of America, whereas Whitman wanted to show the everyday, and write poems about the everyday American. So that was where they differed, but again, they're just very similar in their way, that they are really just trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of what really humanity is. And they were both friends with psychologists to really understand that what's beneath, what's in the mind. And if you go down to the Max Schmidt on a Single Skull, he's a friend of Eakins, and again, this is a physical merit. It's his physical innovation, and which is a Greek ideal, which is what you see in some of his nude paintings and nude photographs. Just this idea of athleticism and being healthy, and he just loves that idea. And on the next page, you see Swimming, which was one of his paintings that had been one of his last paintings when he was at the Pennsylvania Academy, and could be seen as one of the reasons why he was let go. And you see, there's students in typical modeling poses, and they're just playing in the water, and he actually paints himself in the bottom right corner. He's kind of watching the students. Some people think that these are homo paintings, and really I saw it as he just really is interested in studying the human figure. He really just wanted to understand it, and I don't think it really mattered to him whether it was male or female. And he talks about it as conscious meditation of nudity. And there's this love for himself. He likes to insert himself in his paintings. In the past too, he had showed himself in the background of the Gross Clinic, and he had showed he was doing his perspective of his friend. He was in the background of the painting with the skull. So he really inserts himself in his work, and I think is just portraying the fact that he really just wanted to understand human nature. And the last picture you have is actually a photograph that Eakins took of Walt Whitman in his last days. And again, he's not trying to beautify him. He's just showing that this is his age, showing he has his beard and his hair, and his eyes are set back, his wrinkles are really deep, and just showing his age, and he wasn't afraid to show that. And Whitman just adored that, the fact that he wasn't afraid to really show who he really was. Some of the quotes I had, it's a passionate devotion to the body and to the material manifestations of the spirit within it. So, he sees this body as, it's there's these manifestations of the body. There's this spirit that lives within it, and that, it just can do so many amazing things. And a lot of his work, I believe, was just a way for him to show all the beauty of a body and just the beauty of the skin. And another interesting one was he hammered the fact home that men and women were physical creatures subject to the forces of nature beyond their control. So, again, he was he was wanting to show age, he was wanting to show disease, he was wanting to show what really could happen to the body. So his images of the Gross Clinic where he was, showing a surgery was just showing the nitty-gritty, whereas like Walt Whitman would write these kind of graphic poems and in this like free verse style. They both just, really were innovative for their time, and I believe that they had a very special connection, and, I think it's admirable like that they were just, really convinced with what they were doing, and they weren't, really worried about like, how people perceived them or anything. They just were really exploring what they wanted to do, and they didn't care if certain people were gonna not accept them for what they were doing. So yeah, thank you.